The growl hit me before I even opened the door. I stood in the narrow hallway with a metal bowl shaking in my hands, and on the other side of that door was an animal that had already put 3 grown men in the hospital that month. My name is Grace Whitmore, and until that night, my biggest responsibility in this house was answering phones and keeping schedules straight. Nobody had trained me for this. Nobody had trained me for any of it. "Just slide the bowl in and step back," said Victor Kane from behind me. His voice was calm, but there was nothing gentle in it. "If he comes at you, do not run. Running is what gets you hurt." I turned to look at him, hoping to see some kind of reassurance on his face. There was none. Victor Kane did not do reassurance. He was the kind of man whose silence filled a room faster than his words ever could, and everyone in that house, from the newest guard to the oldest advisor, moved carefully around him, like they were walking on thin ice that could crack at any second. "Why me?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Every other option had failed. Every guard who tried to feed that dog had walked away bleeding, and one of them had walked away with stitches in his arm that would leave a scar for the rest of his life. I was the last name on a very short list, and I suspected the only reason my name was even on it was because there was nobody else left to try. "Because I am out of options," he said, confirming exactly what I feared. "And because if this does not work, I am going to have to make a decision I do not want to make." I understood what that meant. The dog's life was hanging by the same thin thread as my nerves. I pushed the door open with my foot, keeping the bowl low, the way one of the guards had told me to before he went pale and refused to say anything else. The room beyond was dim, lit only by a single window near the ceiling, and in the far corner, I saw him. A massive dog, dark-coated, with shoulders like a small horse, and eyes that tracked my every movement. He did not bark. He did not growl again. He just watched me, still and silent, in a way that felt far more dangerous than noise ever could. My hands were shaking so badly that the bowl rattled against the floor when I set it down. I expected him to lunge. I braced for it, every muscle in my body tight, ready to bolt no matter what Victor had told me. Instead, the dog rose slowly to his feet and walked toward me with a kind of careful patience I had not expected from something that had drawn blood from 3 trained men. He stopped in front of me and lowered his massive head toward the bowl, but his eyes stayed on mine the entire time. "Good boy," I whispered, my voice cracking despite myself. "I am not here to hurt you." He ate. Slowly, calmly, without a single sound of aggression. When he finished, he did something that made my breath catch in my throat. He pressed his head against my knee, gentle as anything, and let out a long, low sigh, like he had been carrying some invisible weight for a very long time, and had finally set it down. Behind me, I heard the door creak open wider, and I turned to see Victor standing there, his expression unreadable, but his eyes wide in a way I had never seen before. "He has not let anyone touch him since my brother died," Victor said quietly. "Not once, not even me." I did not know what to say to that. I simply reached down and rested my hand on the dog's head, and he leaned into my palm like he had been waiting for exactly that kind of touch for a long, long time. From that moment on, everything about my place in that house began to change. The next morning, I was called into Victor's office, something that had never happened before. I worked in the outer rooms, managing schedules and paperwork, dealing with vendors and appointments, staying far away from the parts of his life that made the guards carry weapons under their jackets. His office was a place reserved for men in expensive suits who spoke in low voices about things I was never meant to hear. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with confusion. "I need to understand what happened last night," he said, leaning back in his chair, studying me the way a man studies a puzzle he cannot solve. "Diesel has bitten every single person who has tried to get close to him in the last 6 months. My best guard needed 12 stitches. My most trusted handler quit after that dog nearly took his hand off. And you walked in there with a bowl of food, and he acted like a puppy. I do not know why," I admitted honestly. "I was terrified. I thought he was going to attack me too. But he did not." "No," I said. "He did not." Victor studied me for a long moment, tapping his fingers slowly against the surface of his desk. My brother trained that dog himself, before he died. Diesel was loyal only to him. After we lost him, the dog changed. He stopped trusting anyone. I kept him because getting rid of him felt like losing my brother all over again, but I could not keep watching him hurt my men. There was something in his voice when he spoke about his brother that I had never heard from him before. A crack in the armor. A small window into a man everyone in that house feared, but very few people actually understood. "I would like you to take over his care," Victor said, and it was not a request. "Feeding him, walking him, whatever he needs. You will still handle your other duties, but this becomes part of your responsibilities now." I wanted to say no. Every instinct in my body told me that getting closer to this world, to this house, to this man, was a dangerous idea. But there was something about the way Diesel had looked at me, something about the way he had leaned into my hand like he trusted me completely after one single meeting, that made it impossible to refuse. "All right," I said, "I will do it." Word spread through the house quickly. By the afternoon, guards who had never spoken a single word to me were watching me with narrowed eyes as I walked past them toward the kennel where Diesel was kept. I heard whispers, quiet, but not quiet enough, about how strange it was that the quiet assistant from the front office had done what trained security men could not. One guard in particular, a broad-shouldered man named Derek Holt, made no effort to hide his irritation. He was the captain of Victor's security team, a man who had built his reputation on being the most feared enforcer in the house, and he did not appreciate being outperformed by someone who spent her days answering phones. "Careful," he said to me as I passed him in the hallway, his voice low enough that only I could hear it. "Dogs like that do not stay calm forever, and neither does Cain's patience." I did not respond. I kept walking, my heart hammering, unsure whether his words were a warning or a threat. That evening, I sat outside Diesel's kennel with a book I was not really reading, more interested in watching him settle beside me, calm and quiet, his massive head resting near my feet. It was strange how safe I felt beside an animal that had terrified an entire house of armed men. Strange, and somehow comforting, in a place that otherwise gave me very little comfort at all. Victor found me there later, standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, watching us both with an expression I could not quite name. "He trusts you," he said simply. "I think he just needed someone who was not afraid to be gentle with him," I replied. "Most people in this world do not have room for gentle," Victor said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I stopped believing in it a long time ago. I looked up at him, and for just a moment, I saw something behind his eyes that looked almost like loneliness, something raw and unguarded that he clearly did not intend to show me. He caught himself quickly, straightened his shoulders, and the cold, controlled version of Victor Cain returned like a mask sliding back into place. "Keep him calm," he said, turning to leave. "I have a meeting tonight that cannot go wrong." I nodded, watching him disappear down the hallway, and I could not shake the feeling that something in that house had shifted. Not just in the dog, in him, in me, in whatever strange new place I now occupied in this world of danger and silence and unspoken rules. Later that night, unable to sleep, I found myself walking back down to the kennel, just to check on Diesel one more time. The house was quiet at that hour, the kind of quiet that felt heavy rather than peaceful, filled with the soft creak of old floors and the distant murmur of voices from Victor's meeting somewhere on the other side of the building. Diesel lifted his head the moment he heard my footsteps, and instead of the wary stillness I had seen him show every other person in that house, his tail moved slowly against the floor, a small motion that felt enormous given everything I had heard about him. "You are not so scary after all," I whispered, kneeling beside him. He pressed his nose against my hand, and I sat there for a long while, listening to the quiet, letting myself believe, just for a moment, that this strange new world might not be as dangerous as everyone kept warning me it was. I was wrong about that, though I did not know it yet. A door closed somewhere upstairs, hard enough that I felt it through the floor, and Diesel's ears shot up immediately, his whole body going rigid beside me. Voices followed, low and tense, moving quickly through the hallway above us. I could not make out the words, but the tone alone was enough to tell me something had gone wrong during Victor's meeting. I stayed where I was, my hand still resting on Diesel's back, feeling his muscles coiled tight beneath his fur. ready to react to whatever was coming. It struck me then that this animal was not simply calm around me. He was protective, watchful, like he understood, in some way I could not explain, that danger lived in every corner of this house, and that I might need someone paying attention when I could not pay attention myself. Footsteps came down the stairs, quick and heavy, and I stood just as Victor rounded the corner into the hallway, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp with something that looked like controlled frustration. He stopped when he saw me sitting there with Diesel, and for a brief second, the tension in his shoulders seemed to ease. "You should be asleep," he said. "I could not sleep," I admitted. "Is everything all right?" He studied me for a moment, as though deciding how much to say. "Not everything," he finally answered, "but it is handled." I did not press him further. I had already learned, in the short time I had spent near this world, that there were doors in this house not meant to be opened by someone like me, at least not yet. But something about the way he lingered there, watching me with Diesel, instead of walking away immediately, told me that whatever line existed between us had already started to blur. "Get some rest, Grace," he said quietly, and for the first time since I had met him, my name sounded different coming from his mouth, not like an instruction, like something closer to concern. I had no idea yet how much that small shift would cost me, or how deeply I would come to care about the man everyone else in that house was too afraid to know. A gunshot echoed somewhere beyond the compound walls just after midnight, and every light in the house came on at once. I sat up in bed, my heart slamming against my ribs, and for a moment, I could not remember where I was, or why my hands were already shaking before my mind had caught up with the sound. Someone pounded on doors down the hallway, voices shouting orders, boots hitting the floor in fast, hard rhythm. I threw on whatever clothes were nearest and stepped into the corridor, where a guard grabbed my arm and pushed me toward the interior of the house. "Stay away from the windows," he said, his voice tight. "Now." I did not argue. I moved quickly through the hallway, my mind racing with questions I did not dare ask out loud, until I reached the main sitting room where several of the household staff had already gathered, pale and silent, waiting for someone to tell them what was happening. Victor appeared minutes later, dressed, composed, giving orders in a calm voice that did not match the chaos outside. Derek Holt stood beside him, along with two other guards, all of them speaking in short, clipped sentences about perimeter breaches and rival movement near the east fence. "It was a warning shot," Victor said finally, addressing the room, though his eyes moved briefly to me before returning to the group. "The Falcone family wants us to know they are watching. Nobody was hurt. Increase patrols at the fence line and double the interior watch until morning." The staff dispersed slowly, murmuring among themselves, but I stayed rooted where I stood, unable to shake the cold feeling settling into my chest. This was not the life I had imagined for myself when I first took this job. I had wanted stability, a paycheck, a quiet place to build something for myself, after years of moving from one uncertain situation to another. Instead, I had found myself standing in the middle of a war I did not understand, working for a man whose enemies fired warning shots into the night sky just to remind him they existed. "You should not be standing out here," Victor said, appearing suddenly beside me, his voice lower now that the room had emptied. "I could not just go back to sleep," I admitted. "Not after that." He studied me for a long moment, the same way he had studied me the night I fed Diesel for the first time, like he was trying to understand something about me that did not fit neatly into any category he recognized. "This is not a world that forgives people who do not understand the rules," he said. "I should have thought more carefully before pulling you further into it." "You did not force me into anything," I said. "I chose to take care of Diesel. Nobody made that decision for me." Something flickered across his face, something almost like surprise, as though he had not expected me to push back. Most people in that house agreed with whatever he said without hesitation. I was quickly learning that was not who I wanted to be, even in a place built on fear and obedience. The following days brought a strange new rhythm to my life. Mornings began with paperwork in the outer office, followed by long walks with Diesel through the compound grounds, where guards watched us from a careful distance, still uneasy despite weeks of proof that the dog had changed. Afternoons were spent managing schedules, and evenings, more often than not, ended with Victor finding some reason to appear wherever I happened to be. He never said much at first, He would ask about Diesel's mood, whether he had eaten well, whether he seemed calmer than the week before. But slowly, the questions widened. He asked where I had grown up, what had brought me to this city, why someone with my qualifications had ended up working in a house like his, instead of somewhere safer, somewhere ordinary. I needed the money, I told him honestly one evening, as we sat outside near the kennel, while Diesel dozed between us. My mother was sick for a long time before she passed, and the bills did not leave much behind. This job paid better than anything else I could find, and I told myself I would only stay until I had enough saved to start over somewhere quieter. And now? He asked. I hesitated, unsure how honest I wanted to be. Now I am not sure I want to leave as quickly as I planned. He did not respond right away, but I saw something shift in his expression, something careful and unguarded at the same time, like a man standing at the edge of a decision he had not made yet. Derek Holt did not share the same quiet curiosity about me that Victor did. If anything, his resentment grew sharper with each passing week. He made comments just loud enough for me to hear, questioning why an assistant with no security training was being given access to areas of the house reserved for trusted staff. He complained, not directly to Victor, but to the other guards, planting doubts about my sudden closeness to a man who rarely let anyone get close. She is playing a long game, I overheard him say to another guard one afternoon, his voice low but not low enough. Wrapping herself around him through that dog, smart if you ask me, dangerous too. I said nothing when I passed them, keeping my eyes forward, refusing to let him see how deeply his words landed. But that night, lying awake in my room, I found myself wondering if there was truth buried somewhere in his accusation. Had I let myself get pulled toward Victor because of genuine feeling, or because proximity to power in a house like this offered a kind of safety I had never known before? I did not have an answer, not yet, and that uncertainty followed me like a shadow through the following days. A week later, Victor called me into his office again, this time with a folder spread across his desk, containing photographs and reports about the Falcone family's recent movements. He explained, in a voice more open than I had ever heard from him, how his rivalry with them stretched back years, long before I had ever entered his world, rooted in territory disputes and old grudges that refused to die quietly. My brother believed we could find peace with them eventually, he said, his eyes fixed on an old photograph tucked into the corner of the folder. He was always the one who wanted less blood, more conversation. After he died, that hope died with him. How did he die? I asked gently, unsure if the question crossed a line I was not meant to cross. Victor's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought he would refuse to answer. An ambush, he said finally. Falcone's men. I was supposed to be with him that night, but a meeting ran late, and by the time I arrived, it was already over. The weight of that memory settled heavily over the room, and I understood, in that moment, why Diesel's loyalty to his brother had mattered so much to him, and why losing that loyalty afterward had felt like losing his brother twice. I am sorry, I said quietly, meaning it completely. He looked up at me then, his expression softer than I had ever seen it, stripped of the cold control he wore like armor around everyone else in that house. Nobody in this house has said that to me in a long time, he admitted. Everyone else offers strategy, revenge, solutions. You are the first person who has simply offered sorrow. I did not know what to say, so I simply reached across the desk and rested my hand over his, a small gesture that felt enormous given everything unspoken between us. He did not pull away. For a long moment, neither of us moved, the silence between us saying more than either of us seemed ready to put into words. That closeness did not go unnoticed. 2 days later, I found a folded note slipped beneath the door of my room, unsigned, the handwriting deliberately messy to hide its origin. It contained only a single line, "Stay away from things that are not yours to keep." My hands trembled as I read it. I told myself it could have come from anyone, a jealous guard, a resentful staff member, someone simply testing my nerve. But deep down, I suspected exactly who had written it, and the thought that Derek Holt was willing to threaten me directly told me this rivalry between us had grown into something far more dangerous than office gossip. I did not tell Victor about the note. I was not yet ready to bring more conflict into a house already balancing on the edge of war with the Falcone family, and some instinct told me that showing weakness now, revealing fear over an anonymous threat, would only make things worse. The next morning, I forced myself to act as though nothing had happened, carrying the folded note in my pocket like a stone I could not put down. When I passed Derek in the corridor near the kitchen, he gave me a long, measuring look, the kind that made my skin prickle with unease. "You look tired, Grace," he said, his tone almost pleasant, which somehow made it worse. "Sleeping all right these days?" "Well enough," I answered, keeping my voice steady even though my pulse had quickened. "Good," he said, stepping closer than necessary, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "This house has a way of teaching people lessons when they forget where they stand. I would hate to see you learn one the hard way." I held his gaze, refusing to let him see how deeply his words unsettled me. Is that a warning or a threat? His smile did not reach his eyes. "Considerate advice, from someone who has been in this house a lot longer than you have." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding, the folded note in my pocket feeling heavier by the second. I wanted to march straight to Victor's office and tell him everything. The note, the threat, the suspicion coiling tighter in my chest with every passing day. But something held me back, some quiet instinct that told me Derek's resentment ran deeper than jealousy over a dog, and that exposing him without proof might only give him room to strike back harder, in ways I could not yet predict. Instead, I began paying closer attention. I noticed how often Derek disappeared from his post during the evening watch, how he lingered near the security office long after his shift ended, how he sometimes stepped outside to take calls on a second phone he kept separate from the one issued to him by the house. None of it was proof of anything specific, but all of it added to a growing unease that told me something about him did not add up. That evening, while walking Diesel along the far side of the compound grounds, I found myself passing close to the security office windows. Derek's voice drifted out through a gap in the glass, low and urgent, speaking quickly to someone on the other end of a call. "I told you, everything is under control," he was saying. "Just be patient a little longer." I froze where I stood, Diesel's leash tightening in my hand as he too went still, ears pricked toward the sound. I could not make out anything more specific before Derek's voice dropped even lower, and I forced myself to keep walking, my heart hammering against my ribs, terrified he would look up and see me standing there. I did not know exactly what I had overheard, but the tone alone told me it was not innocent, and the timing, so soon after the Falcone family's warning shot near the fence line, made my stomach twist with dread. Somebody inside this house was talking to someone outside it, and I could not shake the growing certainty that Derek Holt was involved far more deeply in this conflict than his uniform suggested. Instead, I doubled my attention toward Diesel, spending long hours beside him in the evenings, finding comfort in his steady presence when the rest of the house felt increasingly unstable. He had become, without either of us intending it, a kind of anchor for me, a reminder that gentleness could still exist in a world built on power and fear. Victor found me there again one night, the two of us sitting quietly beneath the stars, while Diesel rested his massive head across my lap. "You have given him something nobody else in this house could offer," Victor said, settling down beside me, closer than he usually allowed himself to sit. "Peace." "Maybe that is what he needed," I said. "Maybe that is what everyone in this house needs, more than they realize." He turned to look at me then, and for the first time, I saw something entirely unguarded behind his eyes. Something that looked less like the calculating boss everyone feared, and more like a man who had been carrying grief and loneliness for far longer than anyone around him understood. I thought about telling him then, about the note, about the whispered call I had overheard near the security office, but the words caught in my throat, unwilling to break the fragile quiet we had built between us, if only for a few stolen minutes beneath a sky that offered no answers of its own. "Careful, Grace," he said softly. "You are starting to make me believe in things I stopped believing in a long time ago." I did not respond right away, my heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear this time. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, filled with everything neither of us was ready to say aloud, while somewhere beyond the compound walls, the danger that shadowed his world continued moving closer, patient and unseen, waiting for the moment it would demand my full attention. The second note arrived, taped to Diesel's kennel door, and this time it was not subtle at all. I found it early in the morning, before the rest of the house had woken, the paper folded into a tight square, exactly like the first one. My hands trembled as I opened it, already dreading what it might say. The message was short. Some things are not yours to have. Leave before you lose more than you think. I stood there in the cold morning air, Diesel pressing gently against my leg as though he sensed my fear, and for the first time since arriving in that house, I felt truly afraid, not of the world outside the compound walls, but of someone living within them. I made a decision that morning that I had been avoiding for days. I walked straight to Victor's office and knocked before I could talk myself out of it. "Come in," he called, and when I entered, he looked up from his desk with an expression that shifted quickly from mild surprise to concern once he saw my face. "What happened?" he asked, rising from his chair. I placed both notes on his desk, the first one I had kept hidden, and the second one I had found that morning, and watched his expression darken as he read them. "Why did you not tell me about this immediately?" he asked, his voice sharp with something between anger and worry. "I did not want to bring more trouble into a house that already had enough," I admitted. "But I cannot ignore this any longer. Someone in this house wants me gone, and I think I know who." He looked up at me, waiting. "Derek," I said, "I have noticed things. He disappears during his shifts. He makes calls on a separate phone he keeps hidden from the others. Last week I overheard him telling someone that everything was under control, right after the warning shot near the fence line." Victor's jaw tightened, and for a long moment, he said nothing, staring at the notes on his desk, like they held answers he was still trying to piece together. "Derek has been with this family for 8 years, he said finally. "He was loyal to my brother before he was loyal to me. I find it difficult to believe he would turn against us." "I am not saying it is easy to believe," I said carefully. "I am saying it deserves to be looked into, before whatever he is planning goes any further." Victor nodded slowly, though I could see the conflict written across his face, the difficulty of doubting a man who had stood beside him through years of loss and danger. "I will handle this quietly," he said. "I do not want to accuse him without proof. Not yet. But I will be watching him more closely, and I want you to stay close to me until this is resolved. No more walking the grounds alone, especially in the evenings." I agreed, though the idea of needing protection inside a house that was supposed to be my place of safety left a hollow feeling in my chest. The next afternoon, Victor asked me to help him go through old personnel files, searching for anything that might explain why Derek's loyalty could have shifted. We sat together in the study, papers spread across the table between us, sorting through years of records that documented every promotion, every disciplinary note, every small detail of the security team's history. "Here," Victor said, pulling out a report from nearly a year earlier. "Derek requested a transfer to oversee shipments near the eastern warehouses. I approved it without much thought at the time, since he had earned the trust to handle larger responsibilities." "What is significant about the warehouses?" I asked. "They sit close to Falcone territory," he said, his expression darkening as the pieces began falling into place. "If Derek wanted to make contact with them, that assignment would have given him the opportunity, without raising suspicion from anyone here." I felt a chill settle over me as the implications became clearer. A year was a long time to build a betrayal quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to use it. "Do you think he has been working with them since then?" I asked. "I do not know," Victor admitted, "but it fits. It fits far too well." We continued searching through the records long into the evening, and somewhere in the middle of that quiet, focused work, I noticed the tension between us shifting into something gentler. Victor's hand brushed against mine as we reached for the same folder, and neither of us pulled away immediately. He looked up at me, and for a moment, the weight of everything happening around us seemed to soften into something quieter, more private. "I do not know what I would have done these past few weeks without you," he admitted, his voice low. "Everyone else in this house tells me what they think I want to hear. You tell me the truth, even when it is difficult, and somehow, that has become the thing I trust most in this entire house." "I only tell you what I see," I said softly, "nothing more than that." "That is more than anyone else has offered me in years," he said, and before I could respond, He leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss against my forehead, brief and careful, like he was testing whether I would pull away. I did not pull away. Instead, I let myself lean into that quiet moment, allowing myself, just for a little while, to forget about warehouses and warning shots and folded notes taped to kennel doors, and simply exist in the strange, fragile peace we had built together amid all this danger. Over the following days, the tension in the house grew thicker, though it stayed hidden beneath the surface, invisible to anyone who was not paying close attention. Victor kept me nearby more often, inviting me to sit in on smaller meetings that did not involve outside guests, letting me see, piece by piece, the machinery that kept his world running. I learned about supply routes, territory agreements, the careful balance of power that kept peace between his family and the smaller factions scattered throughout the city. It was a world built on constant vigilance, where a single mistake could unravel years of careful planning. Derek, for his part, seemed to sense the shift happening around him. He grew quieter, more careful in his movements, though his eyes still followed me with the same cold resentment whenever our paths crossed. I wondered if he suspected that Victor now knew about the notes, or if his caution came from something else entirely, some plan of his own, moving forward on a timeline I could not see. One evening, while sitting with Victor in the study after a long day of meetings, he finally opened up about something I had not expected. My brother trusted Derek completely, he said, staring into the fireplace where the flames cast long shadows across the room. When we lost him, Derek was the one who held the security team together, while I was too broken to function properly. I owe him a great deal, and that debt makes it hard for me to see him clearly now. Debts do not erase the truth, I said gently. If something has changed in him, owing him loyalty from the past does not mean you owe him blindness in the present. He looked at me then, something soft and grateful passing across his face. You have a way of saying difficult things simply, he said. Most people around me either flatter me or fear me too much to speak honestly. You do neither. I am not afraid of you, I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came. I never have been. Not really. Not after that first night with Diesel. He reached across the space between us and took my hand, his fingers wrapping around mine with a gentleness that felt entirely at odds with the reputation he carried throughout the city. I did not expect to feel this way about anyone again, he admitted quietly. Not after everything I lost, not in a world like this one. Neither did I said honestly, my heart pounding as the space between us seemed to shrink without either of us moving. The moment was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door, and one of the younger guards stepped inside, his face pale with urgency. Sir, there has been a breach at the east gate. Security footage shows someone accessed the outer perimeter cameras remotely, right before the feed cut out for almost 10 minutes. Victor stood immediately, all softness vanishing from his expression, replaced by the sharp, controlled focus I had seen the very first night I met him. Get me the footage the moment it comes back online, he ordered, and find out who had access to those systems tonight. The guard nodded and hurried out, and Victor turned back to me, his eyes now carrying a weight of worry I had not seen before. Stay here, he said. Do not leave this room until I come back for you. I nodded, watching him disappear down the hallway, my mind racing with fear over what a 10-minute gap in security coverage might mean for a house already under threat from a rival family. He returned nearly an hour later, his expression grim. The cameras were disabled from an internal terminal, he said. Someone inside this house did it deliberately, and whoever it was, knew exactly how to avoid detection while doing it. Derek, I said quietly, the name settling between us, like an accusation neither of us wanted to voice too loudly. I cannot prove it yet, Victor said, though the doubt in his voice had shifted into something closer to certainty, but I intend to. Over the next several days, Victor moved carefully, gathering information without alerting Derek to the fact that he was under suspicion. Guards were quietly reassigned, security protocols adjusted, and I noticed Victor spending long hours reviewing old footage and financial records, searching for any thread that might confirm what both of us already suspected. Meanwhile, my bond with Diesel continued to deepen, and in some strange way, the dog seemed to sense the growing tension throughout the house, long before any of us fully understood its source. He grew restless during the evenings, pacing near the windows, refusing to settle unless I sat beside him, his massive body pressed close against mine, as though he intended to shield me from whatever was coming. One night, while walking him along the quieter edge of the compound, I noticed Derek standing near the perimeter fence, speaking quietly into his phone again, his back turned toward the main house. Diesel's ears shot up immediately, a low growl rumbling in his chest, the same low growl I remembered from the very first night I met him, before he had ever trusted me. I pulled him gently to a stop, my heart pounding, watching Derek from a careful distance until he finished his call and slipped the phone back into his jacket. He turned and saw us standing there, and for a brief moment, something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like panic before it disappeared behind his usual cold composure. "Out for a walk?" he asked, his voice carrying an edge that had not been there in previous conversations. "Just clearing my head," I said carefully, keeping my tone light despite the unease coiling tightly in my chest. He studied me for a long moment, then glanced down at Diesel, whose growl had not fully faded. "That dog does not like me very much," he said, an odd note of bitterness in his voice. "Maybe he sees something the rest of us do not," I said, immediately regretting the boldness of my words the moment they left my mouth. Something shifted behind his eyes, cold and calculating, before he offered a thin smile and walked past us without another word. I stood there for a long time afterward, Diesel pressed against my side, both of us watching the darkness where Derek had disappeared, and I could not shake the feeling that whatever plan he had been building for weeks was finally approaching its conclusion. Before I told Victor what had happened at the fence line, I stopped by the kennel to settle Diesel, who had remained tense and alert the entire walk back to the house. He paced in tight circles near the door, refusing to lie down, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window, as though he expected danger to follow us inside. "It is all right," I said softly, kneeling beside him, running my hand along his back until his breathing slowed. "We are safe now." He pressed his head against my shoulder, and I stayed there a while longer, gathering my thoughts before facing Victor with what I had witnessed. Something about Derek's expression near the fence had unsettled me more deeply than I wanted to admit, a flicker of desperation behind his composure that suggested a man running out of time, and men running out of time rarely made careful decisions. I thought about the folder of old shipment records still spread across the study table, about the warehouse assignment that had placed Derek so conveniently close to Falcone territory a year before any of this trouble began. Whatever he had built with them, whatever promises had been exchanged in those quiet, hidden calls, it felt now like a structure, reaching its final, fragile stage, ready to collapse or ready to strike, and I could not tell which outcome felt more dangerous. Diesel finally settled beside me, his weight warm and solid against my side, and slowly my own racing heartbeat began to calm along with his. I thought about Victor's kiss earlier that evening, soft and searching, and how strange it felt to hold both fear and tenderness so closely together, in the same breath, in the same house, on the same night. I told Victor everything the moment I returned to the house, and this time, he did not hesitate. "I have seen enough," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "Tomorrow, I intend to confront him directly, in front of the rest of the security team. If he is innocent, he will have nothing to fear. If he is guilty, I want witnesses present when the truth comes out." I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach at the thought of what tomorrow might bring, unsure whether confronting Derek directly would expose the truth cleanly, or whether it might push him toward something far more desperate and dangerous. That night, I could not sleep, lying awake with Diesel curled at the foot of my bed, a comfort I had grown to rely on more than I ever expected. My mind kept circling back to Derek's expression near the fence line, the panic that had flickered briefly across his face before vanishing behind practiced calm. Whatever he was planning, I feared it would not end quietly, and some instinct deep inside me warned that the coming confrontation would change everything about the fragile peace Victor and I had only just begun to build. Somewhere near dawn, I finally drifted into a shallow, restless sleep, and when I woke, the first gray light of morning was already filtering through the curtains. Diesel lifted his head at the sound of my movement, watching me with quiet, steady eyes, and I found myself grateful, in a way I could not fully explain, for the simple fact that he was there beside me. Whatever the day ahead would bring, Whatever truth the confrontation with Derek would finally expose, I no longer felt as though I was facing it entirely alone. I dressed slowly, my hands steadier than I expected, and made my way down toward the study, where Victor was already waiting, his face set with the same quiet determination I had seen the very first night he asked me to feed a dog nobody else could touch. The security office fell completely silent the moment Victor walked in with the folder of evidence tucked under his arm. Every guard on duty stood at attention, including Derek, who straightened his posture with the same composed confidence he always carried, though I noticed his eyes flicker briefly toward me, before settling back on Victor. "I want to discuss the warehouse assignment from last year," Victor said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that silenced any remaining murmurs in the room. "And the camera outage at the East Gate 3 nights ago." Derek's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who had spent weeks learning to read the tension beneath his calm exterior. "I am not sure what you are asking, sir." "I think you understand exactly what I am asking," Victor said, placing the folder on the table between them. "Records show the outage originated from a terminal, only accessible to senior security staff. You were the only one on duty that night with clearance to that terminal." "Plenty of people had access that night," Derek said, his tone growing sharper. "You cannot pin this on me just because of a shift schedule." "I am not pinning anything on you yet," Victor replied evenly. "I am asking you to explain it." The room remained tense, every guard watching the exchange with careful, guarded expressions, none of them willing to take sides until the truth became clear. I stood near the doorway, my heart pounding, Diesel pressed close against my leg, having insisted on following me the entire way from the kennel, despite my attempt to leave him behind. Derek opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Diesel let out a low, sharp growl, stepping forward until he stood between me and Derek entirely, his hackles raised, his attention locked onto the man with an intensity that silenced the room completely. "That dog has never done that to anyone else in this house," one of the younger guards murmured, almost too quietly to hear. Derek's composure finally cracked. "Control your animal," he snapped, taking a step back despite himself. "He is reacting to something," Victor said quietly, watching Diesel with narrowed eyes. "Animals sense things people try to hide." The tension in the room stretched unbearably thin, until finally, one of the younger security officers, a nervous man named Nathan, who had transferred to the team only months earlier, stepped forward with visible hesitation. "Sir, I need to say something," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I saw Derek near the eastern warehouse gate, 2 nights before the camera outage. He was meeting with someone I did not recognize, someone who arrived in a car with no plates. I did not think much of it at the time, but after everything that has happened since, I thought you should know." Derek's face went pale, his composure crumbling entirely as every eye in the room turned toward him. "That is not what it looked like," he said, his voice rising with panic. "I was handling something separate from all of this. It has nothing to do with the Falcones." "Then explain it," Victor said, his voice deadly calm now, the kind of calm that felt far more dangerous than shouting ever could. Derek's eyes darted around the room, searching for some way out, some explanation that might satisfy the growing suspicions surrounding him. Finding none, his expression shifted from panic into something colder, something resigned. "You do not understand what it is like," he said finally, his voice low and bitter. 8 years of loyalty, and you still trust an assistant with no experience over someone who has bled for this family. I gave everything to this house, and what did it earn me? Watching someone new walk in and take the closeness I spent years building. So you sold us out because you were jealous." Victor's voice cracked with disbelief and fury in equal measure. "I was building a future," Derek shot back. "The Falcones offered me a position in their organization, something better than scraps from a family that never truly valued me. I was going to walk away quietly once everything was arranged. I never meant for it to go this far." "You disabled our security cameras," Victor said. "You gave them a window to strike at us directly. People could have died." Derek said nothing, his silence confirming everything Victor needed to hear. "Take him into custody," Victor ordered the guard standing nearest, his voice tight with controlled anger. "We will handle this properly, without unnecessary violence. But he does not leave this house until every detail of his arrangement with the Falcones has been uncovered. Two guards moved forward, and Derek, seeing no other option, allowed himself to be led away without further resistance, though the look he shot toward me as he passed carried a bitterness that made my skin crawl. Once the room emptied, Victor turned to me, his expression softening from the hard control he had maintained throughout the confrontation. "I am sorry you had to witness that," he said quietly. "I am not sorry it is finally over," I admitted, feeling the tension in my shoulders finally begin to ease. I was afraid for a long time that nobody would believe what I suspected. "I should have believed you sooner," Victor said, guilt evident in his voice. "The notes, the phone calls, all of it. I let my history with him cloud my judgment, and that almost cost this house dearly." "You believed me in the end," I said gently. "That is what matters most." He reached for my hand, and this time, there was no hesitation in the gesture, no careful testing of boundaries. He simply held it, firm and warm, as though finally allowing himself to accept something he had spent weeks fighting against. Later that same night, after Derek had been moved to a secure room under guard, Victor called a meeting with his closest advisors, and for the first time, he asked me to sit in on the entire discussion rather than simply observing from the doorway. A man named Elliot, who had served as Victor's financial advisor for over a decade, spread a series of documents across the table, each one tracing a thread of unexplained payments into an account that did not belong to anyone officially connected to the house. "These transfers started nearly a year ago," Elliot explained, tapping a finger against one of the printed statements. "Small amounts at first, easy to overlook, but they grew steadily over time. Whoever received these payments was being rewarded slowly, carefully, in a way designed not to draw attention." "Derek," Victor said flatly, though it was not a question. "The account traces back to a shell company we have seen before," Elliot confirmed, "connected to Falcone business interests, through at least two other fronts we have already identified." Victor's jaw tightened as he studied the documents, his expression carrying a mixture of anger and quiet grief, the kind that comes from realizing a trusted friend had betrayed everything they once claimed to believe in. "How much damage has this cost us?" he asked. "Nothing catastrophic yet," Elliot said, "but the warehouse routes were compromised. If the Falcones had chosen to strike sooner, the outcome could have been far worse." I sat quietly through the rest of the meeting, absorbing details about supply schedules and security protocols that meant little to me at first, but slowly began to paint a clearer picture of just how deeply this rivalry ran, and how narrowly this house had avoided a devastating loss because of one man's resentment and greed. When the meeting finally ended, Victor lingered behind as the others filed out, rubbing a hand across his tired eyes. 8 years, he said quietly, more to himself than to me. I trusted him with my life more than once, and none of it meant enough to keep him loyal. Some people convince themselves that betrayal is justified long before they ever act on it, I said gently. That does not make your trust in him a mistake. It makes his choice a failure entirely his own. He looked at me, something grateful and exhausted passing behind his eyes. I do not know how you always manage to say exactly what I need to hear, he admitted. I only say what I believe, I replied. Nothing more complicated than that. In the days that followed, the house settled into a quieter rhythm, though the shock of Derek's betrayal lingered in every conversation, every careful glance exchanged among the remaining security staff. Victor worked closely with his most trusted advisors to trace the full extent of Derek's dealings with the Falcone family, uncovering a trail of information leaks that stretched back further than either of us had initially realized. Through it all, Diesel remained close to my side, more relaxed, now that the source of tension he had sensed for weeks had finally been removed from the house. I spent long hours with him in the evenings, grateful for his steady, comforting presence after everything that had happened, and grateful, too, for the way he had helped expose the truth when nobody else in that house could see it clearly. Word of Derek's betrayal spread quietly among the staff, and in the days that followed, I noticed a shift in how the household treated me. The guards who once whispered behind my back now greeted me with a kind of cautious respect, and even the younger officer, Nathan, who had spoken up during the confrontation, made a point of thanking me privately for standing firm when the truth still felt uncertain. I almost did not say anything, he admitted one afternoon, finding me near the garden while Diesel dozed at my feet. I was afraid of what Derek might do if I spoke up. But watching you stand there, unwilling to back down even when nobody else believed you yet, made it easier to find the courage. Courage is easier to find when you are not the only one carrying it, I told him, and he offered a small, grateful smile before returning to his post. Victor, meanwhile, spent long hours coordinating with contacts throughout the city, working to ensure the Falcone family understood that their attempt to weaken his house from within had failed completely, and that any further aggression would be met with consequences they would not easily recover from. The threat of open conflict lingered in the background of every conversation, but for the first time in weeks, the fear inside our own walls had finally quieted. Victor sought me out one evening, as I sat with Diesel near the garden, the first quiet moment either of us had found in days. He settled beside me without a word, watching the dog rest peacefully between us, his massive head resting across both our laps as though he understood, in his own way, that the danger surrounding us had finally passed. "I owe you an apology," Victor said after a long silence. "Not just for doubting your instincts about Derek, but for pulling you into a life this dangerous in the first place. You deserved better than notes taped to kennel doors and threats hidden in hallways." "I chose to stay," I reminded him gently. "Every step of the way, I chose this. Nobody forced me to care about Diesel, or about you." He looked at me then, something vulnerable and hopeful, passing across his face, an expression I doubted many people in his life had ever been permitted to witness. "And do you regret that choice?" he asked quietly. I thought about the fear, the uncertainty, the danger that had followed me since the moment I first walked into that kennel, with a shaking bowl of food in my hands. And then I thought about the quiet moments since then, the gentle kiss in the study, the steady comfort of Diesel curled against me each night, the way Victor's guarded heart had slowly, carefully opened itself to someone the rest of the world assumed he would never trust. "No," I said honestly, "I do not regret it at all." He reached for my hand again, holding it gently beneath the darkening sky, and for the first time since arriving in that house, I allowed myself to believe that whatever came next, we would face it together, without the shadows of hidden betrayal standing between us any longer. Diesel let out a long, contented sigh between us, shifting his weight until he pressed fully against my side, and Victor laughed softly, a sound I realized I had never heard from him before that moment, warm and unguarded in a way that made my chest ache with something close to hope. "He approves," Victor said quietly, running a hand along Diesel's back. "He approved a long time ago," I said, maybe longer than either of us realized. We sat there together as the last light faded from the sky. The three of us settled into a fragile, hard-won peace, and I found myself, for the first time since arriving in that house, unafraid of whatever tomorrow might bring. A convoy of unfamiliar cars rolled up to the front gate, just as the sun began to set, and every guard in the compound reached for their radios at once. I stood near the window of the main house, my pulse racing, watching as the vehicles slowed at the checkpoint, dark and unmarked, exactly the kind of presence that signaled trouble rather than a friendly visit. Victor appeared beside me within seconds, his expression sharp and alert, already moving toward the door before the guards had finished confirming who had arrived. "Stay inside," he said firmly, though I had no intention of listening completely. I followed at a careful distance, watching from the doorway as the lead car stopped and a tall, silver-haired man stepped out, flanked by two others in dark suits. I recognized the tension in Victor's shoulders immediately, and I understood, without needing to be told, that this man represented the Falcone family directly. "Marco Falcone," Victor said evenly, stepping forward to meet him halfway across the courtyard. "I did not expect a personal visit. After what happened with your former captain, I thought a conversation was overdue," Marco replied, his voice smooth, almost pleasant, though something cold lingered beneath it. "I understand you uncovered his arrangement with my organization." "I did," Victor said, "and I understand you no longer have a source inside my house feeding you information." Marco's expression flickered, a brief crack in his composed exterior. "Loose ends are unfortunate," he said, "but they do not change the larger picture. Our territories will continue to overlap, Victor. The question is whether we continue wasting resources fighting over inches of ground, or whether we find a more efficient arrangement." Victor studied him carefully, and for a long moment, silence stretched between the two men, heavy with years of history and grievance neither of them had ever fully laid to rest. "My brother once believed peace was possible between our families," Victor said finally. "I buried that hope with him." "Perhaps it is time to dig it back up," Marco said. "Continued conflict benefits neither of us. I am prepared to discuss new terms, provided you are willing to listen." I watched the exchange from the doorway, my heart pounding, uncertain whether this visit represented a genuine opportunity for peace or another carefully disguised threat. Diesel appeared beside me suddenly, having slipped away from his kennel unnoticed, his body tense but quiet, watching the courtyard with careful, measured attention rather than open aggression. Victor glanced back toward the house, his eyes finding mine briefly, before returning to Marco. "I am willing to listen," he said. "But we will discuss terms on neutral ground, with witnesses from both sides present. I will not repeat the mistake of trusting blindly again." Marco nodded, something like respect passing across his expression. "Wise," he said. "I will arrange the details through proper channels. No more warning shots, no more hidden arrangements. If we are going to end this conflict, we will do it honestly, or not at all." The convoy departed as quickly as it had arrived, leaving the compound in a tense, uncertain quiet. Victor returned to the house, his expression unreadable, and found me waiting near the entrance, Diesel pressed close against my side. "Do you believe him?" I asked. "I do not know yet," Victor admitted. "But after everything Derek's betrayal cost us, I cannot afford to dismiss any opportunity to end this conflict permanently, even if it comes from an unexpected direction." Before the negotiations could truly begin, Victor called a meeting with his closest advisors to prepare for what lay ahead. Elliot, still cautious, after uncovering the extent of Derek's betrayal, argued for a slower approach, wary of trusting Marco Falcone's sudden interest in peace. "This could easily be a trap," Elliot warned, spreading a map of the city across the table, marking the proposed neutral meeting locations with careful precision. "They may simply be regrouping after losing their inside source, buying time to plan something more direct." "I have considered that," Victor said, "which is why we will not go in blind. Full security detail, witnesses from independent parties, and no agreements signed without verification from multiple sources." I sat quietly at the edge of the table, listening as the men debated logistics late into the night, grateful that Victor no longer dismissed caution as weakness, but folded it carefully into every decision he made. When the meeting finally ended, he found me waiting near the door, and something in his tired expression softened as our eyes met. "You do not have to wait up for me every night," he said gently. "I know," I replied. "I want to." He reached for my hand, holding it briefly before letting the moment pass, both of us aware that whatever waited on the other side of these negotiations would shape the future of everyone living within these walls. Over the following 2 weeks, careful negotiations unfolded between the two families, mediated by neutral parties trusted by both sides. Victor spent long hours away from the house, attending meetings in guarded locations across the city, each session slowly chipping away at years of hostility that had cost both families more than either side had ever fully acknowledged. I remained at the compound during those weeks, managing the household alongside Diesel, who had settled fully into his role as my constant companion, no longer the feared animal nobody could approach, but a gentle, watchful presence trusted by everyone who now understood his history. Nathan, the young guard who had spoken up during Derek's confrontation, took on a larger role within the security team during this period, earning quiet recognition for his honesty when it would have been easier to stay silent. I found myself grateful for the way the house had begun healing after Derek's betrayal, the suspicion and fear that once lingered in every hallway slowly replaced with a cautious, hopeful stability. Midway through the negotiations, a moment of real danger threatened to unravel everything Victor had worked to build. During one of the neutral meetings, a group of unidentified men attempted to breach the perimeter of the meeting location, sparking immediate chaos among the security details from both families. Word reached the compound within minutes, and I stood frozen near the radio room, listening as reports came in fragmented and urgent, unable to do anything but wait for confirmation that Victor was safe. The tension in the house stretched unbearably thin, until finally, nearly 2 hours later, Victor returned, his jacket torn at the shoulder, but otherwise unharmed. He explained that the attempted breach had come from a smaller, independent faction, hoping to profit from renewed chaos between the two families, rather than from Marco Falcone himself. A detail that both parties agreed only strengthened their resolve to finalize peace quickly, denying any opportunity for outside interests to exploit the instability between them. I was terrified, I admitted, holding him tightly the moment he walked through the door, Diesel circling us both with anxious energy, until he was certain Victor was truly unharmed. I know, he said softly, holding me just as tightly. I am still here. That night, we sat together long after the rest of the house had gone quiet, neither of us willing to separate for even a moment, both of us aware of how quickly everything could have been lost. It was in that fragile, frightened silence that I understood, more clearly than ever before, exactly how deeply my feelings for him had grown, far beyond anything I had expected when I first walked into that house months earlier. Victor returned from the final negotiation session late one evening, exhaustion evident in every line of his face, but something else lingered there too, something lighter than I had seen from him in all the time I had known him. "It is done," he said, finding me in the study where I had been reviewing schedules while waiting for news. A formal agreement, divided territory, shared trade routes, and a commitment from both families to resolve future disputes through negotiation rather than violence. "That is remarkable," I said, rising to meet him. "After everything that happened, I did not expect peace to come this quickly." "It almost did not," he admitted. "There were moments during those meetings when old grudges nearly derailed everything. But I kept thinking about what you said, weeks ago, about debts from the past not requiring blindness in the present. I realized the same applied to old rivalries. Holding on to my brother's grief would not bring him back. It would only continue costing lives that did not need to be lost." I reached for his hand, and he pulled me gently into an embrace, the first time he had held me so completely since everything had begun weeks earlier. "Thank you," he murmured against my hair, "for seeing things clearly when I could not." We stood there together for a long moment, the weight of everything that had happened finally beginning to lift from both our shoulders. Diesel, who had been resting nearby, rose and pressed himself against our legs, letting out a low, contented sound that made us both laugh softly, despite the exhaustion of the past several weeks. In the days that followed, the compound began to feel like an entirely different place. Guards who once moved through the halls with quiet tension now spoke more openly with one another, the fear of hidden betrayal finally replaced with something closer to genuine trust. Victor spent less time locked away in meetings and more time simply present in the house, sharing meals with the staff, walking the grounds in the evenings, allowing himself, slowly, to become the kind of leader his brother had always hoped he could be. One evening, nearly a month after the peace agreement had been finalized, Victor asked me to join him in the garden after dinner, a request that felt different from his usual invitations, carrying a nervous energy I had never seen from him before. Diesel followed us out, settling near a low stone bench, while the last light of evening painted the sky in soft shades of gold. "I have spent most of my life believing that softness was a weakness this world could not afford," Victor said, standing before me with his hands clasped behind his back, an unfamiliar hesitation in his voice. "My brother believed differently, and I buried that belief along with him when he died. Then you walked into my house with a bowl of food for a dog nobody else could touch, and slowly, without either of us intending it, you taught me that gentleness and strength are not opposites at all." My heart pounded as I listened, unsure where his words were leading, though something in his expression told me this moment mattered more than any conversation we had shared before. "I do not know how to be the kind of man who deserves someone like you," he continued, "but I know that I do not want to spend another day of my life without trying." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant ring that caught the last light of the setting sun. "Grace Whitmore, will you stay by my side, not as my assistant, not as someone hired to care for a dog, but as the woman I love, for as long as you will have me?" Tears gathered in my eyes as I looked between the ring and the man standing before me, a man who had once seemed impossibly cold and distant, now stripped bare of every wall he had built to protect himself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. "Yes," I said softly, my voice trembling with emotion. Yes, I will stay. He slid the ring onto my finger, with hands that shook slightly, betraying the depth of feeling behind his usually composed exterior, and then he pulled me into a kiss that felt like the culmination of every quiet, stolen moment we had shared since that first terrifying night with Diesel. Diesel barked once, a sound of pure joy rather than warning, and rose to press himself between us, his massive body wagging with an energy I had never seen from him before that moment. We both laughed, pulling back just enough to include him in our embrace, the three of us standing together in the quiet garden as the last light of day faded into a peaceful evening sky. He has been rooting for this longer than either of us realized, I said, running my hand along Diesel's head as he leaned contentedly against my leg. He has good instincts, Victor said, his eyes never leaving mine. Better than mine, apparently, since it took me weeks longer to recognize what he understood from the very first night. I thought back to that terrifying moment, standing outside a kennel with a shaking bowl of food, certain I was about to be attacked by an animal everyone else feared. I never could have imagined, in that moment, that the same dog would lead me not just to safety, but to a love I had never expected to find in a house built on danger and control. In the weeks that followed, the compound continued its quiet transformation, no longer a place defined by fear and hidden threats, but a home slowly rebuilding itself around trust, loyalty, and the kind of gentle strength that Victor's brother had always believed possible, even in a world that rarely made room for it. Nathan earned a permanent place on the senior security team, his honesty during Derek's confrontation remembered as the turning point that had protected the entire house from far greater harm. The peace agreement with the Falcone family held steady, monitored carefully, but honored by both sides, proof that even the deepest rivalries could soften when both parties chose honesty over old grudges. And every evening, without fail, Diesel curled contentedly between us as we sat together in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in warm, quiet colors, a silent witness to everything we had overcome to arrive at this moment. He had once been a dog nobody could approach, feared throughout an entire house for wounds only grief could explain. Now he rested peacefully at the center of a family neither Victor nor I had ever expected to build, a living reminder that even in the coldest, most dangerous corners of the world, gentleness could still find its way home. I looked down at the ring on my finger, then up at Victor, who watched me with the same quiet devotion Diesel had shown me on that very first night, and I understood, finally and completely, that I had found exactly where I belonged,